So, picture the scene. It's 1938 and the Azzurri have just won their second consecutive World Cup, having won the previous edition in 1934. Sandwiched in between those two World Cup victories was an Olympic win in 1936, meaning that between 1934 and 1938, the Italian national football team completed one of the best international runs ever seen, past or present, to this day. Now, this wasn't some happy accident that happened out of nowhere. The win in 1938 was the culmination of a plan conceived of and executed by the world's first fascist, Benito Mussolini. What follows is an exploration of how and why Benito Mussolini leveraged the power of football to bolster support at home and increase Italian prestige abroad. We are Know Your Ball, and this is episode 1 of Fascist Football. Italy as we know it today is a relatively recent invention. Ever since the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, the Italian peninsula had been a patchwork of city-states, duchies, kingdoms, and lands controlled by the Pope. It wasn't until the 18th century that a group of idealistic Italians sought to unify the Italian peninsula and all of its Italian-speaking people. In 1815, the Italian peninsula looked a little something like this. It was dominated to the south by the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, in the centre by the Papal States, to the northeast the Austrian Empire, and to the northwest the Kingdom of Sardinia-Piedmont, the legal predecessor to the Kingdom and subsequent Republic of Italy. By 1860, the Kingdom of Sardinia-Piedmont had gained control of the northern central regions, here revealing the famous red, white and green of the Italian national flag. This set the stage for this man, Giuseppe Garibaldi, who you know for his biscuit fame. Described by A.J.P. Taylor as the only wholly admirable figure in modern history. In 1860, he led the Expedition of the Thousand, which saw 1,000 red-shirted volunteers land in Sicily to successfully conquer the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies on behalf of the Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia. As a result of his success, the Italian map looked a little something like this. And subsequently this, and subsequently this. Broadly speaking, the Italy we know today. Why is this relevant? It's relevant because it helps us to contextualize how young the new Italy was when Benito Mussolini came to power some 50 years later. It's also relevant to understanding how Benito Mussolini attempted to use football to consolidate Italy's political unification to truly unify a country that was still hugely culturally divided. Despite unification on paper, the new Italy remained a mosaic of different regions, each with its own language and culture. Significant differences existed between the industrialized north and the agricultural south, between Milan and Naples, between Palermo and Venice. Following unification, it became evident that a common unifying language was needed to tie the new country together. Authorities of the time chose the Tuscan dialect as the basis for standard Italian, due to its cultural prestige and use in literary works. In the words of Kneecap, stories are built from language, nations are built from stories, and the Italian state attempted to write the story of their new country in standardized Italian by embarking on an Italianization campaign. One result of this was that in 1909, the Italian football authorities gave the new game of football an Italian name, calcio. The change was a politically inspired one. Nationalist ideas had already permeated those who ran the game in Italy. The change was also a historical one. Calcio Fiorentino was a game with a ball and a pitch which had been played in Florence during the Renaissance. The choice of the word calcio was an attempt by Italians to claim the game for their own. They had really invented what was now called football many hundreds of years earlier. The other, more broadly accepted version of history is that football arrived in Italy in the late 1800s, and in the beginning, there were the English. In the late 1800s, impromptu games of football amongst British sailors in the port towns of Livorno, Genoa, Palermo, and Naples began to crop up. Italy was on the way to and from India, and many British ships stopped off there. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1896 led to a boom in the English communities on these shipping routes. No official records of clubs exist until the 1880s and 1890s. But what we do know is that in the absence of state, church, or socialist evangelizing, none of whom approved of football, Italian football was created and incubated in the most cosmopolitan, industrial cities of the country by a band of British and Swiss businessmen, their Italian counterparts, enthusiastic aristocrats, and bored students, as well as upper-class Anglophile schoolboys. The official birth of Italian football is usually traced back to the employee of a British textile company, Edoardo Bosio, who formed the first club in Turin, Torino Football and Cricket Club, in 1887, using footballs that he'd brought back with him from Nottingham, England. Unfortunately for International Football Club, there was nobody else to play. This quickly changed as other pioneers took up Bosio's lead and formed clubs in Turin as well as elsewhere in Italy. In September 1893, for many the real date of Calcio's birth, the Genoa Cricket and Football Club was set up by British consular officials. A year later, another club was formed in Turin, the Football Club Torinese. 4 years later, a British maritime doctor by the name of James Spensley arrived in Genoa to look after the sailors on passing coal ships. A polyglot, philanthropist, and scouting enthusiast, he was also a football devotee who organised the first real game of football in Italy. This pioneering match was between Genoa Football and Cricket Club and Football Club Torinese, and it took place in 1898. Genoa won. The Italian Football Federation was formed in February, and in May of that year, Italy's first football championship of 4 teams took place in Turin in one day. Official records date from here, so Genoa's victory in 1898 counts as a championship success with the same statistical weight as Inter's of 2024. Comprised of 3 teams, Genoa and 3 from Turin, International Torino won their first semi-final 2-1, courtesy of a winning goal from Jim Savage, a Marquis and the team's captain. Genoa won their semi-final 2-0, and they won the final 2 by a score of 2-1, which was played at 3 p.m. on the same day after a sandwich break for lunch. Italy's first football champions, therefore, were a team with an English name, Genoa, not Genova. The English language itself was considered the mark of modernity and the language of football. The power of English football remained in the anglicised club names of AC Milan, not Milano, and Genoa, not Genova, as well as the continued use of the word Mr. for football managers and coaches. There was a small crowd of 100 people for the final. This was understandable, as many people had other things on their mind. May 1898 was not a particularly happy time for Italians. As Genoa celebrated its first championship in Turin, Milan was in chaos. Bread riots led to barricades going up across the city. The government decided to repress these protests and the army was sent in. To this day, nobody knows how many protesters were killed, but modest estimates put the number at 400. All eyes were on Milan, and little attention was given to 3 90-minute games on the dusty periphery of Turin. Dr. James Spensley's Genoa team went on to dominate early Italian football history, winning the title again in 1899, 1900, 1902, 1903 and 1904. The Doctor played in goal for all of these finals, apart from 1899 when he moved to left back to allow one of only two Italians in that particular team to take over between the sticks. It's not clear what kind of managerial role Dr. Spensley played, no one really knows. But by being captain, we can assume he had some kind of leadership role, and some Italian histories even list him as a forefather of modern football coaching in Italy. When war broke out in 1914, Dr. Spensley signed up as a military doctor. He died in agony at a hospital in Germany from injuries sustained, it is said, whilst tending to an enemy soldier. We are Know Your Ball, and this has been episode 1 of Fascist Football. Next week we'll investigate how the game developed in Italy and the rise of the world's first fascist, Benito Mussolini.